On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 experienced hikers cut their way out of their own tent. Not through the entrance. Through the canvas wall, with a knife, from the inside. Then they ran into a Siberian blizzard, in temperatures near -30, without their boots. Every one of them died. 2 were found in their underwear, beside the remains of a fire. 1 had a fractured skull. 2 had crushed chests, with injuries the pathologist compared to a car crash, and almost no marks on their skin. 1 was missing her tongue. The Soviet investigation closed the case with a single sentence that has haunted it ever since. The hikers died of a compelling natural force, which they were unable to overcome. For 67 years, nobody could say what that force was. Science now thinks it finally knows. And not everyone agrees. They were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnical Institute in the city then called Sverdlovsk. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a radio engineer who built his own equipment and had led hard expeditions before. With him was Zinaida Kolmogorova, one of the most experienced in the group, and one of the most loved. There was a young economics student who had survived being accidentally shot by a hunter on an earlier trip. Her name was Lyudmila Dubinina. There was an engineer called Rustam Slobodin. There was a man who had worked at a closed nuclear plant, a detail that would matter later. That was Yuri Krivonishenko. There was a hiker who once drove off a bear with nothing but a geological hammer. That was Yuri Doroshenko. One of them had been born inside a labor camp, the son of a French communist deported by Stalin. His name was Nikolai Thibault-Brignol. Another worked in a secret laboratory in Moscow. That was Alexander Kolevatov. And the oldest by far, at 38, was a war veteran who joined the group late, and whom almost none of them knew well. That was Semyon Zolotaryov. This was not a group of tourists wandering into the mountains. They were applying for the highest hiking certification the Soviet system offered. To earn it they had to cross the northern Urals in winter, on foot and on skis. If anyone was equipped to survive that night, it was them. We know what happened on the way in, because they photographed it. Their cameras were recovered, and the film survived. You can watch them loading a truck, riding a sledge, laughing in the snow. On the 28th of January, one of them turned back. Yuri Yudin had chronic pain in his legs, and it flared up badly. There is a photograph of him saying goodbye, embracing Zinaida Kolmogorova. He is smiling. He would spend the rest of his life as the 10th member. The one who lived. Yudin died in 2013, and he never stopped asking what happened to his friends. On the 31st of January, the remaining 9 reached the Orspia River and tried to cross the pass. They failed. The temperature was too low and the wind was too strong, and they were forced back down to spend the night. Remember that, because it matters. They had already turned back once. The next day they built a store in the upper Orspia, and left their surplus food and equipment in it, to collect on the way back. And then, on the 1st of February, they climbed the slope of a mountain the local Montsi people call Kholat Syakhl. The name is usually translated as Dead Mountain. And there, roughly 1.5 kilometers from the tree line, on an open slope, in the path of the wind, they stopped and pitched their tent. Why they camped there, instead of descending into the shelter of the forest, is the first question nobody can answer. When the group failed to send a telegram by the 12th of February, nobody panicked. Delays were normal. It was only on the 20th that volunteers, students, and teachers set out to look for them. On the 26th of February, they found the tent. It was half buried in snow, on the slope where they had left it. And it was empty. The tent had been cut open. Not by an animal, and not from outside. The cuts were made with a knife, from within, by someone inside the tent trying to get out fast. Inside, almost everything was still there. Their boots. Their coats. Their axes. Food, laid out as if they were about to eat. Whatever made 9 people leave, it did not give them time to dress, and it did not let them use the door. Leading away from the tent, down the slope, the searchers found footprints. 8 or 9 sets of them, preserved in the hardened snow. They were not the prints of people running in panic in different directions. They were walking together, in a line. Some in socks. Some with a single shoe. Some barefoot. And they went straight down, toward the forest, 1.5 kilometers away. At the tree line, under a large cedar, the searchers found the first 2 bodies. Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko. They were lying beside the remains of a small fire. They were wearing almost nothing. Underwear. A single sock. Doroshenko had no shoes at all. Both had died of hypothermia. And the cedar above them told its own story. Branches were broken off up to a height of 5 meters. Someone had climbed it, in the dark, in the cold, with frozen hands, and torn at the tree hard enough to leave skin and blood on the bark. From the cedar back toward the tent, the searchers found 3 more. Igor Dyatlov, gripping a birch branch. Zinaida Kolmogorova, further up the slope. Rustam Slobodin, between them, with a small crack in his skull that had not killed him. All 3 were facing the tent. They had died walking back up. And that tells you something important. Whatever drove them out of that tent, they believed, at some point, that it was safe to return. But they never made it. 5 bodies. 5 deaths from cold. It was a tragedy, but it was starting to look like an explicable one. Then the snow melted. On the 4th of May, more than 2 months later, the searchers found the last 4. They were in a ravine, 75 meters from the cedar, buried under 4 meters of snow. Ludmila Dubinina. Semyon Zolotaryov. Alexander Kolevatov. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol. And these 4 were different. First, they were dressed. Better dressed than the others, in fact, and some of their clothing had belonged to Krivonishenko and Doroshenko, cut from their bodies at the cedar. The people in the ravine had taken clothes from the dead. Which means, at the cedar, some of them were still alive and still thinking. Second, they were destroyed. Thibault-Brignol had a fractured skull. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had multiple broken ribs and massive chest trauma. Dubinina's heart had been damaged. And yet, the soft tissue over those injuries was almost untouched. The chief medical examiner, Boris Vozrozdeny, testified that the force required was comparable to a car crash. He also said that no human being could have inflicted it. There was more. Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, and parts of her lips. Zolotaryov was missing his eyes. Kolevatov was missing his eyebrows. This is the detail that built the legend. It is also the detail most often reported wrong. The bodies had lain in a stream of meltwater in that ravine for months. Forensic experts, then and now, attribute the missing soft tissue to decomposition in water and to scavenging animals. It is not evidence of an attacker. It is evidence of time. So what did the investigation actually establish? 6 of the 9 died of hypothermia. 3 died of trauma. There was no sign of a struggle. No other footprints on that slope. Nothing was stolen. The tent was cut from the inside, by them. But there were details that refused to fit. Some of the clothing was radioactive. Specifically, garments belonging to Krivonishenko and Dubinina carried beta radiation above normal levels. Krivonishenko had worked at a secret nuclear facility, which may explain it, and the level was not lethal. But it was never fully accounted for. Several searchers and local Monsi reported bright spheres of light in the sky over the region that winter. Those reports are real, and they were recorded. What caused them is a separate question, and Soviet rocket tests from Baikonur are a documented, mundane candidate. And then there is the sentence. On the 28th of May, 1959, the case was closed. The prosecutor wrote that the hikers died as a result of a compelling natural force, which they were unable to overcome. And then the file was classified. That sentence explains nothing. It names no force. And that vacuum is where 67 years of theories grew. Let's be clear about what comes next. Everything in this section is theory. Not one of these has ever been proven, and I am going to label each one as what it is. Theory 1. The Monsi attacked them. This was the first official suspicion, and it collapsed almost immediately. There were no other footprints, nothing was stolen, and the Monsi actively helped the search. It was, in the end, an accusation with no evidence behind it. Theory 2. A military test. A parachute mine, detonating above the ground, could in principle produce internal injuries without external wounds, and might explain the radiation and the lights. Against it, there is no documentary evidence of a test there that night, no blast damage to the tent or the trees, and no burns on the bodies. Theory 3. Infrasound. Wind passing over the dome of Kholat Syakhl could, in the right conditions, generate low-frequency sound capable of causing intense anxiety and panic. It is a genuinely interesting idea. It is also unproven, and it does not explain the crushed chests. Theory 4. Paradoxical undressing. This one is real and well documented in hypothermia cases. As the body freezes, blood vessels dilate, and the victim feels an overwhelming rush of heat and tears off clothing. It explains why 2 men died in their underwear. It does not explain why 9 people cut their way out of a tent. And then there is the Yeti. In 2014, a television program built an episode around a blurry frame from the group's own camera showing a dark figure in the trees. It is one of their own. The archive that holds the film labels the frame plainly, Thibaut Brignol, in the snow. It is not a creature. It is a photograph of a friend. In 2019, Russia did something it had not done in 60 years. It reopened the case. In July 2020, prosecutors announced their conclusion. An avalanche. The group cut their way out, fled to the tree line in near zero visibility, and could not find their way back. Many people found that answer insulting. The slope was too shallow. There was no avalanche debris. The tent was still standing. And then, in 2021, 2 engineers published the piece that had been missing. Johan Gorm and Alexander Puzrin, writing in the journal Communications Earth and Environment, modeled something more specific than an avalanche. A slab avalanche. A block of compacted snow, released hours after the group cut into the slope to pitch their tent, driven by katabatic wind, sliding on a weak layer beneath. It would be small. It would leave almost no trace by morning. And using crash test data from the car industry, they showed that a slab of that size, striking people lying rigid on a hard floor, could break ribs and skulls without tearing the skin. It is the best physical explanation anyone has produced. And it is still a model, not a verdict. It does not explain the radiation. It does not explain why they never came back up. Researchers still dispute it, and so do the families. 67 years later, we have a mechanism that fits the injuries. What we still do not have is the night itself. 9 people, who knew exactly what they were doing, made a decision in the dark that killed all of them. We know what may have hit them. We still don't know what they saw. If this case stayed with you, watch the Somerton Man next. A man on a beach, every label cut from his clothes, and a name that arrived 74 years too late.